Does the Bermuda Triangle really exist? Or is it simply a story that grew larger than the facts? Between Florida, Puerto Rico, and the island of Bermuda lies a vast area of the North Atlantic that for decades has been associated with mysterious disappearances of ships and aircraft. This region became known as the Bermuda Triangle. But here is the first important point. The Bermuda Triangle is not an officially recognized area by any international maritime or aviation organization. It does not appear on official nautical charts as a special danger zone. There is no legal boundary, no formal status. The name emerged from popular culture. The idea gained momentum mainly in the 1960s, when magazines and books began compiling accounts of disappearances in the region. One of the key figures who popularized the concept was writer Charles Berlitz, who published The Bermuda Triangle in 1974, turning the topic into a global phenomenon. But before diving into the myth, we need to examine the historical facts. The region between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico is one of the busiest areas in the world in terms of maritime and air traffic. Since the 19th century, it has been a strategic trade route between North America, the Caribbean, and Europe. Thousands of ships and aircraft cross this area every year. The greater the volume of traffic, the higher the statistical probability of incidents. That is basic mathematics, but it rarely appears in sensational narratives. One of the most frequently cited cases is the disappearance of the USS Cyclops in 1918. The U.S. Navy ship vanished with 309 people on board while sailing between Barbados and Baltimore. No wreckage was ever found. It was a real tragedy. But later investigations suggested plausible explanations: overloading with manganese or possible structural instability and adverse weather conditions. The Cyclops was an aging vessel and may have been operating beyond safe capacity. Another famous case involves Flight 19, a group of 5 U.S. Navy training aircraft that disappeared in 1945 during a navigation exercise. The pilots were young, some with limited open-ocean navigation experience. Records indicate confusion over compass readings and navigational miscalculations. A rescue plane sent to search for them also disappeared, but that aircraft likely exploded mid-air, something not uncommon in that era due to fuel vapor issues. No concrete evidence of supernatural phenomena was ever found. Meteorology is another key factor. The region is prone to powerful tropical storms and hurricanes. Strong ocean currents such as the Gulf Stream pass through the area. This current can disperse wreckage rapidly, complicating investigations. Additionally, parts of the region include extremely deep waters, exceeding 8,000 meters in the Puerto Rico Trench. In the event of a sinking, debris can become nearly impossible to locate. That creates the impression of a complete disappearance. But the absence of wreckage does not equal an unexplainable event. Another frequently cited factor is magnetic variation. It is true that there is a line on Earth known as the agonic line, where magnetic north and true north align. At certain historical periods, this line passed through parts of the North Atlantic, which could have caused navigational confusion if magnetic declination was not properly accounted for. But this is not unique to the Bermuda Triangle. Similar magnetic conditions exist in other regions of the world. There is no verified permanent magnetic anomaly in the area. And perhaps the most important fact: the United States Coast Guard and international maritime insurers do not recognize the Bermuda Triangle as an area of extraordinary risk. Statistically, the number of incidents in the region is proportional to its heavy traffic. In other words, there is no scientific evidence that more disappearances occur there than in other high-traffic areas around the world. So why does the myth persist? Because mystery has narrative power. Disappearances without visible wreckage fuel imagination. The lack of immediate answers creates space for theories: aliens, dimensional portals, lost civilizations like Atlantis. But none of these theories have verifiable scientific support. And yet, the Bermuda Triangle continues to fascinate. There is still much to explore. How did media transform isolated accidents into a collective narrative? How were human errors reinterpreted as mystery? And why do we feel such a strong need for extraordinary explanations when natural ones are often enough? To understand why the Bermuda Triangle myth became so powerful, we need to look more closely at the most cited cases, and separate documented history from what was amplified by popular culture. The case of the so-called Flight 19 is perhaps the most emblematic. On December 5, 1945, 5 U.S. Navy TBM Avenger aircraft took off from Florida for a routine navigation training exercise over the Atlantic. The flight leader reported compass problems. Based on recorded radio communications, it became clear there was confusion about the aircraft's actual position. The instructor believed he was flying over the Florida Keys, when he was likely already over the open Atlantic, east of Florida. This misinterpretation led the group to continue flying farther out to sea, away from the coastline. Fuel began to run low. Contact was lost at nightfall. No wreckage was ever found. But that is not unusual for aircraft accidents over open ocean, especially in 1945, when tracking technology was extremely limited. A search plane sent to look for Flight 19 also disappeared. Later investigations indicated that this second aircraft likely exploded mid-air. Models of that era had a documented history of fuel vapor leaks that could lead to sudden explosions. There is no technical record indicating unexplained magnetic phenomena or supernatural events. There are records of navigational disorientation, possible human error, and challenging weather conditions. Another essential factor in understanding the region is the Gulf Stream. This powerful ocean current flows through the western Atlantic at significant speed. In the event of a sinking, debris can be rapidly dispersed over dozens or even hundreds of miles. That makes investigations extremely difficult and contributes to the perception of complete disappearance. In addition, the region is one of the most hurricane-active areas in the Western Hemisphere. Tropical storms form in the Atlantic and can intensify rapidly. Even modern vessels face severe risk if they fail to avoid storms properly. There is nothing supernatural about that. It is meteorology. It is also important to mention the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest area of the Atlantic Ocean. In some locations, depths exceed 8,000 meters. If an aircraft or ship sinks in those regions, recovering wreckage becomes extraordinarily difficult, even with modern technology. For much of the 20th century, locating objects on the deep ocean floor was nearly impossible. Absence of evidence is not evidence of the unexplained. It is technological limitation. So why did the triangle idea solidify? The answer involves media, narrative, and cultural context. In the 1950s and 1960s, the world was immersed in the Cold War, the space race, and growing fascination with science and mystery. Stories about aliens, parallel dimensions, and lost civilizations were gaining popularity. The Bermuda Triangle fit perfectly into that collective imagination. Authors such as Charles Berlitz compiled isolated incidents, some occurring outside the original triangular area, and presented them as part of a mysterious pattern. Many of these accounts ignored official investigations or existing technical explanations. Cases with determined causes were framed as unsolved mysteries. Routine accidents were reclassified as enigmas. This created a cohesive narrative where, in reality, there were independent events. There is another rarely mentioned fact. Maritime insurance companies do not charge special premiums for vessels crossing the region. That would not be the case if there were statistically elevated risk. The United States Coast Guard has officially stated that there is no evidence of specific anomalies in the area. Thousands of vessels cross the region every year without incident. This does not mean the sea there is calm. On the contrary, it is a dynamic region with heavy traffic, variable weather, strong currents, and extreme depths. But none of those factors are unique. Other parts of the world present similar risks. The Bermuda Triangle, therefore, exists as a cultural concept, but not as an officially defined geographic entity or a scientifically proven anomaly zone. And yet, the question remains fascinating. Why are we so drawn to the idea of mystery in the ocean? Why do we often prefer extraordinary explanations when ordinary ones are enough? If the Bermuda Triangle is not officially recognized as an anomalous zone, why has the myth remained so persistent? The answer lies less in the ocean, and more in the human mind. The region commonly described as stretching between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico is one of the busiest areas on the planet. Since the early 20th century, it has concentrated strategic trade routes, heavy tourism, military traffic, and civilian flights. The greater the volume of movement, the greater the absolute number of incidents. But the human mind does not process raw numbers easily. It processes stories. And isolated stories, when grouped under a single label, create the illusion of a pattern, even when that pattern is artificial. In the 1960s and 1970s, the world was immersed in fascination with the unexplained. It was the era of flying saucers, the space race, and renewed interest in lost civilizations like Atlantis. Within that cultural context, maritime disappearances were reinterpreted through a new lens. Events that had previously been treated as accidents were reframed as mysteries. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops became evidence of an unknown force. Flight 19 was described as an inexplicable compass failure. Storms were portrayed as sudden and anomalous phenomena. But when official reports are examined, the picture changes. In the case of the Cyclops, there were suspicions of structural overload. In the case of Flight 19, there was likely navigational error. In many maritime incidents, severe weather conditions were documented. The mysterious narrative emerges when technical details are omitted. There is also a psychological phenomenon known as confirmation bias. When someone believes an area is mysterious, they tend to focus only on events that reinforce that belief. Incidents outside the region receive less attention. Safe crossings do not become headlines. Thousands of aircraft cross the Western Atlantic every year without any extraordinary occurrence. But those flights do not become books. Another important point is that many cases attributed to the Bermuda Triangle occurred outside the traditionally defined area. Some took place in the Pacific. Others in parts of the Caribbean not included in the original triangle. The boundaries have varied depending on the author. There is no precise geographic consensus. That alone suggests we are dealing with a narrative construct, not a scientific one. It is also essential to consider technological evolution. In the early 20th century, navigation systems were limited. Compasses could be affected by local variations. There was no GPS, communications were unreliable. If a vessel or aircraft encountered trouble, it could vanish without leaving traceable evidence. Today, with satellites, radar, and advanced monitoring systems, complete disappearances are far rarer. If there were a persistent physical anomaly in the region, it would continue affecting modern aircraft and ships in measurable ways. There is no evidence that this occurs. That said, the ocean still demands respect. The Gulf Stream can rapidly alter trajectories. Tropical storms can intensify within hours. The Puerto Rico Trench represents extreme depths. These factors create a naturally challenging environment. There is no need to invoke dimensional portals to explain real risks. The sea itself is powerful enough. The Bermuda Triangle, therefore, is real as a cultural myth, but not as a scientifically proven supernatural zone. It exists in the collective imagination, sustained by books, sensational documentaries, and media repetition. And perhaps that reveals something even more interesting than any supposed maritime mystery. Human beings have a deep need to transform the unknown into extraordinary narrative. The ocean is vast, dark, and unpredictable. When something disappears within it, the absence of an answer leaves space for imagination. To move beyond the myth, it is essential to examine how modern science views the region known as the Bermuda Triangle. Oceanographers, meteorologists, and navigation experts do not treat this area as anomalous. On the contrary, it is widely studied, continuously monitored, and crossed daily by thousands of ships and aircraft. One of the most important features of the region is the Gulf Stream. It is one of the strongest ocean currents on the planet, carrying massive volumes of warm water from the Caribbean toward the North Atlantic. In some stretches, it can reach speeds exceeding 6 kilometers per hour, about 4 miles per hour. In the event of a shipwreck, debris can be quickly carried far from the original location, complicating investigations. This helps explain why some accidents appear to leave no trace. But the absence of wreckage is not the absence of a cause. It is a consequence of ocean dynamics. Another major factor is hurricanes. The Western Atlantic is one of the most active regions in the world for tropical cyclone formation. Storms can intensify within hours. Before the era of meteorological satellites, fully established only in the second half of the 20th century, predicting sudden weather changes was far more difficult. Early 20th century cargo ships, and even 1940s military aircraft, were far more vulnerable than modern vessels equipped with radar and real-time weather monitoring. When analyzing older disappearances, we must consider the technological limitations of their time. There is also the magnetic question. For years, speculation suggested that the Bermuda Triangle contained magnetic anomalies capable of disorienting compasses. However, geophysics experts confirmed that magnetic variations occur in many parts of the world. The so-called agonic line, where magnetic north and true north align, has shifted across different regions over the centuries. There is no scientific record of a permanent or unique magnetic anomaly in that part of the Atlantic. Navigation errors caused by miscalculating magnetic declination are well-documented human mistakes, not mysterious phenomena. Another element contributing to the myth is extreme depth in certain areas, such as the Puerto Rico Trench. In places exceeding 8,000 meters over 26,000 feet deep, recovering wreckage requires highly advanced technology, even today. For much of the 20th century, such recovery was simply impossible. Thus, Many older cases remained without physical evidence not because of supernatural mystery, but because of technological limitations. Popular culture also played a significant role. Sensational books, television programs, and dramatic documentaries reinforced the idea that something inexplicable lurked in the region. Cases were selectively grouped together. Incidents with established causes were presented as open enigmas. Events outside the traditional boundaries were incorporated into the narrative. The myth grew because it is narratively powerful. Disappearances at sea are inherently unsettling. When they are given a collective name, the Bermuda Triangle, they gain almost mythological identity. And once myths take hold, they are difficult to dismantle. But there is a deeper question behind all of this. Why do we need the triangle to be mysterious? The ocean covers more than 70% of the planet's surface. Much of it remains little explored. Symbolically, it represents the unknown. Assigning extraordinary phenomena to a specific area is a way of giving shape to a broader, more diffuse fear of the sea. We turn the unknown into story. And stories are easier to confront than silence. Today, commercial ships cross the region daily. Aircraft fly through its airspace without incidents beyond global statistical norms. There are no scientific reports indicating an abnormal rate of disappearances. The Bermuda Triangle does not appear in official records as a special risk zone. It exists as a cultural construct. There is still one essential dimension to examine before drawing a final conclusion: the difference between mystery and the unknown. The Bermuda Triangle became synonymous with inexplicable disappearances. But when we carefully analyze historical records, something important emerges. Nearly every case attributed to the region has plausible explanations based on human error, weather conditions, or technical failure. That does not mean every detail was recovered. The ocean rarely returns everything it takes. But the absence of complete answers is not evidence of a supernatural force. It is a consequence of the nature of the sea. The ocean has always been a canvas for symbolic projection. For centuries, sailors spoke of sea monsters and massive whirlpools. Medieval maps carried warnings such as, "Here be dragons." Fear of the unknown has always accompanied navigation. In the 20th century, the monsters changed form. They became mysterious magnetic fields, dimensional portals, or lost civilizations beneath the waves. But the psychological function remained the same: to give a face to the unknown. There is also an important cultural factor. The Bermuda Triangle is not unique in terms of historical maritime accidents. Other regions, the Sea of Japan, the North Sea, Cape Horn, have seen serious and deadly incidents. Yet none acquired the same mythic identity. Why? Because the Bermuda Triangle narrative emerged at a specific historical moment: the rise of mass media, the expansion of television, and widespread public fascination with paranormal phenomena. The name Bermuda Triangle is powerful. It defines the unknown. It turns a vast stretch of the Atlantic into a character. And characters are more memorable than statistics. If we examine modern data, we see that the region is one of the busiest in the world for maritime and air traffic. Cruise ships regularly travel between Florida and Bermuda. Commercial aircraft operate daily routes between North America and the Caribbean. There are no official reports indicating an abnormal accident rate there. If a specific physical anomaly existed, it would continue affecting modern aircraft equipped with GPS, weather radar, and redundant navigation systems. It does not. So does the Bermuda Triangle really exist? Geographically, yes, there is a region of the Atlantic bounded roughly by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. But as a scientifically verified zone of mystery or anomaly, no. It exists as a cultural construction. It exists as a modern myth. It exists as a symbol of our ambiguous relationship with the ocean. Fascination and fear intertwined. The sea remains vast and powerful. Storms still form. Currents still scatter wreckage. Depth still challenges technology. But none of this requires supernatural explanations. Perhaps the real mystery is not in the ocean at all. Perhaps it lies in the human need to transform rare events into extraordinary narratives. Before drawing a final conclusion, there is one last essential point to consider: the role of fear in the construction of the myth. The Bermuda Triangle did not gain fame only because of disappearances. It became famous because the ocean itself represents absolute uncertainty. When a ship disappears on land, there are always traces. When an airplane crashes over a continent, wreckage is eventually found. But in the deep sea, everything can vanish. And emptiness creates discomfort. Human beings struggle to accept the phrase, "we don't know." The mind seeks to fill gaps. When there is no immediate answer, imagination steps in. That is exactly what happened with the Bermuda Triangle. Isolated cases were grouped together. Events with partial explanations were treated as unsolvable. Ordinary accidents were framed as part of a mysterious pattern. And the myth gained strength because it offered something technical explanations do not: a compelling narrative. There is also an interesting geographic factor. The region lies close to the United States, one of the world's largest producers of media. This amplified stories that, in another part of the planet, might never have achieved global attention. If the same incidents had occurred in a less visible area of the South Atlantic, there likely would be no triangle at all. The myth depended as much on media as on the sea. Another rarely discussed point is the evolution of maritime and aviation safety. Modern satellite navigation systems, constant communication, and global tracking have drastically reduced the possibility of total disappearances. When accidents occur today, wreckage is located far more efficiently. If a specific physical phenomenon existed in that area, it would continue producing abnormal patterns even with advanced technology. There is no evidence of that. The Bermuda Triangle ultimately reveals more about us than about the ocean. It reveals our tendency to turn statistics into legend. It reveals our need for mystery. It reveals our enduring fascination with the unknown. The sea remains vast, powerful, and unpredictable. But it is not magical. It does not need to be. Nature alone is more than capable of producing dramatic events. There is one final element that must be examined before drawing a true conclusion: the power of repetition. The Bermuda Triangle became famous not only because of the cases often cited, but because those same cases have been repeated for decades. The disappearance of Flight 19, the loss of the USS Cyclops, a handful of early 20th century merchant ships. The same examples have resurfaced in books, television programs, and documentaries for more than 50 years. When a story is repeated often enough, it begins to feel like accumulated evidence. But repetition is not proof. It is amplification. It is also important to recognize that many of the most dramatic accounts were exaggerated over time. In some cases, weather conditions were described as clear skies, when official records indicated storms. In others, radio communications were simplified or taken out of context to make events seem more mysterious. Small narrative adjustments can transform a plausible accident into a compelling enigma. This process is not always malicious. Often it results from the pursuit of dramatic storytelling. But it distorts public perception. The ocean, on its own, already presents considerable risks. Storms can develop rapidly. Strong currents can displace vessels. Human error remains a decisive factor in many accidents. Most disappearances attributed to the Bermuda Triangle involve a combination of these elements. There is no validated scientific record of a recurring, unexplained physical phenomenon in the area. No maritime or aviation authority recognizes the region as anomalous. Insurance companies do not apply special premiums. Commercial traffic continues to move through the region regularly and without abnormal incident rates. So why does the myth persist despite the evidence? Because it satisfies something deeper. Human beings have always sought mysterious frontiers. In the past, they were the edges of the known map. Later, unexplored jungles. Today, deep space in the ocean's abyss. The Bermuda Triangle occupies that symbolic role, a place where the unknown feels possible. Even if science says otherwise. Perhaps the more interesting question is not, does the triangle exist? But, why do we need it to exist? Maybe because accepting that accidents result from human error, unpredictable weather, and technological limitations is less exciting than imagining invisible portals in the Atlantic. Maybe because the vast, dark ocean reminds us that there is still much we do not control. And that, by itself, is unsettling. There is one final element that must be examined before drawing a true conclusion: the power of repetition. The Bermuda Triangle became famous not only because of the cases often cited, but because those same cases have been repeated for decades. The disappearance of Flight 19, the loss of the USS Cyclops, a handful of early 20th century merchant ships. The same examples have resurfaced in books, television programs, and documentaries for more than 50 years. When a story is repeated often enough, it begins to feel like accumulated evidence. But repetition is not proof. It is amplification. It is also important to recognize that many of the most dramatic accounts were exaggerated over time. In some cases, weather conditions were described as clear skies, when official records indicated storms. In others, radio communications were simplified or taken out of context to make events seem more mysterious. Small narrative adjustments can transform a plausible accident into a compelling enigma. This process is not always malicious. Often it results from the pursuit of dramatic storytelling. But it distorts public perception. The ocean, on its own, already presents considerable risks. Storms can develop rapidly. Strong currents can displace vessels. Human error remains a decisive factor in many accidents. Most disappearances attributed to the Bermuda Triangle involve a combination of these elements. There is no validated scientific record of a recurring, unexplained physical phenomenon in the area. No maritime or aviation authority recognizes the region as anomalous. Insurance companies do not apply special premiums. Commercial traffic continues to move through the region regularly and without abnormal incident rates. So why does the myth persist despite the evidence? Because it satisfies something deeper. Human beings have always sought mysterious frontiers. In the past, they were the edges of the known map. Later, unexplored jungles. Today, deep space in the ocean's abyss. The Bermuda Triangle occupies that symbolic role, a place where the unknown feels possible. Even if science says otherwise, perhaps the more interesting question is not, does the triangle exist? But, why do we need it to exist? Maybe because accepting that accidents result from human error, unpredictable weather, and technological limitations is less exciting than imagining invisible portals in the Atlantic. Maybe because the vast, dark ocean reminds us that there is still much we do not control. And that, by itself, is unsettling. Before the final conclusion, we must confront one essential point. The ocean has never needed supernatural mystery to be dangerous. The Bermuda Triangle lies in a region where climate, ocean currents, and heavy traffic constantly intersect. The Gulf Stream, tropical storms, and extreme depths create a naturally challenging environment. For centuries, thousands of vessels have crossed the Atlantic. Some reached their destination, others did not. But that is not unique to this region. If we examine global maps of maritime and aviation accidents, we see incidents occurring along all major ocean routes. The North Sea, the Western Pacific, the Indian Ocean, all have recorded tragedies throughout history. The difference is that only one area was given a mythological identity. There is also a powerful narrative element in the geometric shape itself. A triangle suggests a defined boundary, almost mystical. Three connected points forming a symbolic figure. But its boundaries vary depending on the author. There are no official limits. The area shifts according to the needs of the story. That alone indicates we are dealing with a cultural concept, not a geographical one. Another key factor is the evolution of scientific investigation. Today, satellites monitor weather in real time. Global positioning systems track aircraft and ships continuously. Underwater sensors map ocean depths with increasing precision. If there were a specific physical phenomenon, gravitational anomalies, permanent magnetic disturbances, spatial distortions, modern instruments would have detected it by now. There is no evidence of that. Yet the myth persists because it does not rely solely on facts. It relies on imagination. The sea, when viewed from shore, appears endless. From the air, it is a vast, uniform expanse. It does not easily reveal what lies beneath. That natural silence leaves room for stories. And stories, when well told, tend to outlive technical reports. The Bermuda Triangle is, in essence, a mirror. It reflects our relationship with the unknown. It reflects our difficulty in accepting that the world is complex, but not necessarily mysterious. It reflects our desire to transform the unpredictable into something extraordinary. The ocean does not need dimensional portals to be frightening. It is already vast, deep, and powerful. Before the final conclusion, there is one more question that must be faced honestly. What truly disappears in the Bermuda Triangle? Ships? Aircraft? People? Or our tolerance for the unknown? The region known as the Bermuda Triangle became a symbol of mystery because it combines three powerful elements: deep ocean, unpredictable weather, and extremely heavy traffic. That creates a setting where accidents can happen, and where physical evidence can be difficult to recover. But over the decades, technical investigations have rarely uncovered signs of anything beyond natural or human causes. Navigation errors, sudden storms, mechanical failures, technological limitations of the time. These explanations may be less dramatic, but they are consistent with historical records. It is also important to remember that the ocean is not static. The Gulf Stream moves continuously. Weather systems form and dissipate rapidly. The seafloor is uneven with extreme depths. When something disappears there, it can become practically unreachable. For much of the 20th century, the ability to locate wreckage in deep water was extremely limited. That fed the perception of total disappearance. But difficulty in search operations is not evidence of an extraordinary phenomenon. It is evidence of human limitation in the face of nature. There is another rarely mentioned point. The actual number of incidents in the region is not statistically higher than in other high-traffic areas around the world. Insurance companies do not classify the area as exceptional. Maritime and aviation authorities do not recognize any specific anomaly. If the Bermuda Triangle were an unusually dangerous zone, consistent data would support that claim. There is none. What does exist is narrative repetition. Historical cases are retold with emphasis on mystery. Minor details are amplified. Technical explanations are omitted or presented as insufficient. Over time, a collection of stories creates the impression of a pattern, and a pattern creates a myth. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this story is this. The Bermuda Triangle does not reveal a mystery about the ocean. It reveals a mystery about us. About our need to find extraordinary meaning in rare events. About our ancient fascination with the sea. About our discomfort with what we cannot fully control. The ocean remains vast and unpredictable. It will continue to produce storms, strong currents, and occasional accidents. But none of that requires a supernatural explanation. Nature itself is powerful enough. There is one final layer that must be explored before drawing a definitive conclusion: the difference between legitimate mystery and mystification. The Bermuda Triangle became a cultural icon because it combines three narratively powerful elements: disappearance, absence of physical evidence, and vast oceanic space. When something vanishes in the deep sea, there is no clear final scene. No visible ruins. No immediate emotional closure. And human beings do not handle unfinished stories well. Over the decades, each accident in the region was reinterpreted through the lens of enigma. But when we examine historical records, we see something different. Plausible causes, technical investigations, meteorological context, and the technological limitations of the time. Most of the incidents occurred before the era of GPS, before constant satellite monitoring, before modern communication systems. That changes everything. There is also the statistical factor. The region between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda is a strategic route for commerce and tourism. Thousands of vessels and aircraft cross that space every year. Even if occasional accidents occur, they do not exceed the numbers proportionally expected in a high-traffic area. If a recurring physical anomaly existed, it would manifest in a consistent and measurable way. There is no evidence of that. Yet the myth persists because it offers something technical data does not: compelling narrative. The name, Bermuda Triangle, transforms a portion of the ocean into a character. It suggests an invisible, almost supernatural boundary. That personification makes storytelling easier. And stories endure longer than scientific reports. There is also a deeper symbolic dimension. The ocean remains one of the planet's last natural frontiers. Despite technological advances, vast areas of the seafloor are still poorly explored. Real scientific unknowns exist. But unknown does not mean magical. It means complex. Turning that complexity into legend is a human way of coping with immensity. Perhaps the true mystery of the Bermuda Triangle is not what happens there, but why we continue to ask whether something inexplicable happens there. Because the sea, when seen from the horizon, still appears infinite. And infinity has always fueled imagination. There is one final dimension that must be explored at maximum depth before any definitive conclusion: the relationship between ignorance, imagination, and narrative power. The Bermuda Triangle became a global cultural phenomenon not because science discovered something inexplicable there, but because the absence of immediate explanation is fertile ground for symbolic construction. The ocean is one of the few environments where loss can be total. When a ship disappears on land, there are traces. When an aircraft crashes in the mountains, wreckage is visible. But in the deep sea, especially in regions influenced by the Gulf Stream and extreme depths like the Puerto Rico Trench, everything can be swallowed and redistributed within hours or days. That physical silence becomes narrative silence. And silence is uncomfortable. During the 20th century, particularly between the 1950s and 1970s, the world was undergoing intense technological and cultural transformation. Space was being explored. Nuclear energy reshaped perceptions of human power. Television amplified stories like never before. In that environment, maritime disappearances were not just accidents, they were opportunities to question the limits of science. Authors such as Charles Berlitz compiled existing cases and presented them under a unifying lens. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops was reframed as an unsolvable mystery, despite plausible structural hypotheses. Flight 19 became a symbol of malfunctioning compasses, even though records indicate navigational error and progressive disorientation. The narrative did not require complete invention. It required selection. Select the most intriguing cases. Omit technical explanations already recorded. Repeat the most dramatic examples. Repetition creates the perception of pattern. And pattern creates myth. Another powerful element is geometric form. A triangle suggests a clear boundary. 3 points, Florida, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, imaginarily connected. But that delimitation was never official. Different authors drew different borders. Some expanded the area. Others included incidents outside the traditional region. The concept is flexible because it is symbolic. It is not recognized as a special risk zone by international maritime organizations. It does not appear on nautical charts as an anomalous area. There are no statistics indicating an abnormal rate of accidents compared to other heavily traveled ocean routes. And yet the name endures. Because names have power. From a scientific perspective, the factors involved are known and studied. The Gulf Stream can rapidly disperse debris, making recovery difficult. Tropical storms can intensify quickly. Extreme depths complicate retrieval efforts. Human error remains a primary cause in both aviation and maritime accidents. None of these factors are unique to the region. But their combination, alongside dense traffic, creates an environment where incidents will inevitably occur over time. And when they do, the narrative is already waiting to receive them. There is also collective psychology at work. Human beings tend to overestimate rare events when they are dramatic. Complete disappearances are emotionally powerful. The mind seeks an explanation proportional to the emotional intensity of the loss. Yet reality is often less spectacular. A miscalculation, insufficient fuel, an unexpected storm, an overloaded structure, simple causes. And simple causes rarely satisfy popular imagination. The Bermuda Triangle therefore reveals something essential about our relationship with the unknown. The ocean covers more than 70% of the planet's surface. Much of its floor remains poorly explored. It symbolically represents the limits of human control. When something vanishes there, the sensation is not only material loss, it is confrontation with immensity. And immensity fuels imagination. Today, commercial aircraft cross the region daily, equipped with redundant navigation and communication systems. Cruise ships carry thousands of passengers along the same routes. Satellites monitor weather in real time. Ocean sensors record magnetic and gravitational variations. If a recurring physical anomaly existed, it would be detected. There is no evidence of that. What exists is the sea. Powerful, unpredictable, but natural. Perhaps the question was never, does the Bermuda Triangle exist? Perhaps the more honest question is, do we need it to exist? Because accepting that accidents happen due to human error and natural forces may be less thrilling than imagining invisible portals in the Atlantic. But it is also more true. There is still one aspect that must be explored even more deeply before the final conclusion: the role of doubt. The Bermuda Triangle has survived for decades because it occupies a comfortable space between certainty and uncertainty. It is not scientifically proven to be supernatural. Yet it is also not a place where every historical case was fully resolved with recovered physical evidence. And that intermediate zone, where there is no confirmed mystery, but also no absolute closure in every episode, is exactly where imagination thrives. In many maritime cases from the early 20th century, investigations were limited by technology. There were no black boxes, no satellite tracking, no advanced sonar systems. Reconstructing an accident in deep water was often nearly impossible. Official reports frequently ended with plausible technical hypotheses, but without enough wreckage for total confirmation. And for the public, probable is not the same as proven. The gap between likely explanation and definitive proof became narrative fuel. Another relevant factor is the persistence of the ocean as psychological territory. Outer space may seem distant, but the ocean is right there, visible from the shoreline. It occupies our physical horizon. And at the same time, its abyssal regions remain profoundly unknown. That combination of proximity and depth creates symbolic tension. The Bermuda Triangle became a way to materialize that tension. It offers a specific location where the diffuse fear of the sea can be concentrated. It is not the entire ocean. It is that triangle. This boundary makes fear manageable and narratively efficient. It is also interesting to observe how the myth has evolved over time. In the 1970s and 1980s, theories involving aliens and dimensional portals were popular. Later, hypotheses emerged about methane gas bubbles rising from the seafloor, potentially reducing water density and causing ships to sink rapidly. That hypothesis has been tested in laboratory conditions, but there is no evidence of methane releases in the region at a scale sufficient to explain historical disappearances. With each generation, the myth adapts to the scientific language of the era. But it remains a myth, and there is a powerful contrast to consider. While the Bermuda Triangle was portrayed as mysterious and dangerous, thousands of voyages were completed safely. Cargo ships crossed commercial routes. Aircraft transported passengers between continents. Oil platforms operated routinely. Those stories did not become books. Because normality does not sell. Mystery does. What is most fascinating is that even in the presence of consistent scientific evidence, the myth continues to be told. This reveals something profound about human nature. We do not seek only facts. We seek meaning. And sometimes, extraordinary meaning is more appealing than technical explanation. There is still one final layer to dismantle before we close, and it may be the most important of all: the difference between a physical phenomenon and a cultural phenomenon. The Bermuda Triangle did not begin as a scientific discovery. It was not identified by oceanographers. It was not classified by maritime authorities. It emerged as a narrative, first in magazine articles, then in books, then on television, and eventually in the global imagination. It is a communication phenomenon. That does not mean the events associated with it were not real. The disappearances happened. Ships were lost. Aircraft failed to return. Families were left without answers. The sea claimed lives, as it always has, long before any triangle was given a name. The central point is that grouping these events under a single label created the impression of a coordinated pattern. And a coordinated pattern suggests a common cause. But when examined case by case, the causes diverge. Tropical storms, navigational disorientation, structural failures, human error, technological limitations of the time. There is no single physical element connecting all of the incidents. We must also recognize the power of language. Bermuda Triangle is a strong phrase. It suggests an invisible boundary, almost ritualistic in nature. The geometric shape conveys a sense of precise delimitation, when in reality the boundaries vary depending on the source. That symbolic geometry helps solidify the myth, because it gives shape to the unknown. And once the unknown has shape, it becomes narratable. Another essential factor is technological evolution. Today, weather satellites monitor hurricane formation days in advance. Global navigation systems track aircraft in real time. Commercial ships operate with redundant systems and constant communication. If there were a specific and recurring physical phenomenon in that region, intense magnetic distortions, gravitational anomalies, consistent electromagnetic interference, it would appear in modern data. There is no scientific evidence indicating that it does. Current traffic through the region is heavy and routine. But perhaps the most fascinating element is this. The Bermuda Triangle reveals something profound about the human condition. For centuries, the sea represented the ultimate frontier. It is vast, deep, dark. It offers no fixed landmarks like mountains or cities. It is a space of transition, not permanence. When something disappears into it, it seems to dissolve into immensity. And the human mind does not easily accept dissolution. We want beginnings, middles, and endings. We want cause and effect. When the effect exists, a disappearance, but the cause is not immediately visible, discomfort emerges. And discomfort generates narrative. There is also a broader reflection here. The Bermuda Triangle is not the only modern myth built upon real events. It is a classic example of how isolated facts can be reorganized to create the perception of an extraordinary pattern. This process appears in many areas of human history. Select the unusual. Ignore the ordinary. Amplify the intriguing. Repeat until it feels like a rule. And that is how myth is born. But the ocean does not need myth to be respected. It remains capable of producing devastating storms. It remains deep enough to conceal wreckage for decades. It continues to challenge technology and navigation. Respect for the sea is legitimate. Supernatural mystery is not necessary to justify that respect. Perhaps the final question is not, does the Bermuda Triangle exist? But rather, what do we learn by asking it? We learn that the unknown attracts us. We learn that the absence of answers creates space for imagination. We learn that stories survive longer than technical reports. And we learn that the ocean, vast and silent, will continue to host events that remind us of our vulnerability. There are no confirmed invisible portals. No documented inexplicable forces. No evidence of permanent anomaly. There is the ocean. And the ocean by itself is immense enough to inspire both fascination and respect. If there is still something to explore before the final conclusion, it is the difference between ancestral fear and rational analysis, because the Bermuda Triangle is exactly where those two forces meet. Since antiquity, the sea has been seen as a space of uncertainty. Seafaring peoples feared hidden reefs, sudden storms, and treacherous currents. Before modern cartography, the ocean was literally the edge of the known world. That fear was not irrational, it was prudent. Sailing has always involved real risk. When the 20th century introduced advanced engines, radio communication, and aircraft capable of crossing oceans, it also introduced a new expectation: control. Humanity began to believe it had mastered both sea and sky. The myth of the Bermuda Triangle emerges precisely in that context. It appears as a counterpoint to the idea of total dominance. It is as if it says, there is still something that escapes us. Yet when we examine the historical episodes attributed to the region, we find no break in the laws of physics. No statistically abnormal pattern. No validated scientific report identifying an unexplained phenomenon. What we find are accidents, some tragic, within one of the busiest maritime and aviation corridors on the planet. We also need to talk about the mathematics of risk. If thousands of ships and aircraft cross an area every year, it is inevitable that some will experience incidents over decades. The relevant question is not, did accidents happen there? But, did more accidents happen there than in comparable regions? Available analyses indicate that they did not. Maritime insurance companies do not impose extraordinary premiums for vessels crossing the region. Aviation authorities do not classify its airspace as anomalous. There are no records of permanent magnetic disturbances or unique atmospheric phenomena. The ocean there is dynamic, as it is in many parts of the world. But it is not magical. There is also the power of media repetition. For decades, documentaries, sensational programs, and popular books have reinforced the same examples. The USS Cyclops, Flight 19, early 20th century merchant ships. These cases became narrative icons. But they are rarely presented with all the available technical details. When we include context, weather conditions, possible structural weaknesses, navigational limitations of the era, the mystery diminishes. And that reduction of mystery often does not serve popular storytelling. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect is this: the Bermuda Triangle has become a metaphor. It symbolizes the space where science does not provide an immediate answer, even if it eventually offers a plausible explanation. It symbolizes the confrontation between natural vastness and human fragility. It symbolizes our tendency to transform uncertainty into legend. And in that sense it does exist. Not as an extraordinary physical phenomenon, but as a lasting cultural phenomenon. The sea will remain vast. It will continue to generate storms. It will continue to challenge navigators. It will continue to conceal wreckage in extreme depths. That is not supernatural mystery. It is geographic reality. The ocean is a complex system, governed by physics, meteorology, and fluid dynamics. And yet, when we look at the horizon, we feel something that goes beyond equations. We feel immensity. Perhaps that is the real reason the Bermuda Triangle persists. Not because there is an invisible portal, but because the sea reminds us of our scale. Before kilometers of deep water, we are small. Before tropical storms, we are vulnerable. Before oceanic silence, we are aware of our finitude. The myth does not arise from physics. It arises from feeling. If there is one final idea to push to its limit before closing, it is this: the Bermuda Triangle is not a geographic enigma, it is a human one. The Bermuda Triangle occupies a very specific place in the collective imagination. It is not the deepest part of the ocean. It is not the most remote. It is not the least explored. And yet, it became synonymous with unexplained disappearance. Why? Because it combines three powerful narrative ingredients: proximity, recurrence, and silence. Proximity, it lies along major commercial and tourist routes. Recurrence, historical cases were repeated and grouped together. Silence, the ocean does not easily return answers. That combination creates perfect ground for modern mythology. It is important to understand that the sea is not empty. It is a dynamic system. The Gulf Stream transports millions of cubic meters of warm water every second. Hurricanes feed on the ocean's thermal energy. Cold fronts descend from the continent. Extreme depths make search operations extraordinarily difficult. The ocean is complex. But complexity is not supernatural mystery. It is physics operating on a colossal scale. During much of the 20th century, before the consolidation of satellite technology, the disappearance of a vessel could be absolute. Without modern transponders, without continuous tracking, a ship could vanish beyond the horizon and never be located again. That did not require invisible forces, only human limitation. Today, monitoring systems drastically reduce that possibility, and the triangle continues to function as a regular international transit corridor. Cruise ships cross the region weekly. Commercial aircraft fly overhead daily. Oil platforms operate with industrial routine. If there were a permanent physical anomaly, it would be detectable. It is not. The myth persists because it does not depend on scientific verification. It depends on emotional impact. Total disappearances evoke something primitive. They suggest being swallowed by the unknown. The ocean, with its dark depths, is the perfect stage for that projection. When an aircraft crashes on land, the investigation is visible. When a ship vanishes in deep water, imagination fills the void. And imagination fills what is missing. There is also the role of contemporary culture. Books, television programs, and sensational documentaries created their own language around the triangle: mysterious forces, unknown energy fields, unexplained anomalies. These phrases are powerful, even when they are not supported by scientific data. Repetition transforms hypothesis into belief. And belief, when widely shared, becomes an autonomous cultural phenomenon. But perhaps the deepest reflection is this: the Bermuda Triangle is less about the ocean and more about our relationship with limits. Human beings have always sought frontiers. When the map of the Earth was completed, we turned our eyes to space. When space began to be explored, we rediscovered the ocean depths. We seem to need places where the unknown still feels possible. The triangle offers that sensation, even if the data suggests otherwise. And there is a quiet irony in all of this. While we debate hypothetical mysteries, the true wonder often goes unnoticed. The real ocean is far more astonishing than any myth. It regulates the global climate. It hosts complex ecosystems. It contains underwater mountain ranges larger than those on land. It shapes atmospheric circulation and planetary life patterns. Reality surpasses legend. Perhaps the definitive answer to the question, does the Bermuda Triangle really exist, is a dual one. Yes, it exists as a cultural concept, as a powerful narrative, as a modern symbol of the unknown. No, it does not exist as a scientifically proven supernatural zone or statistically anomalous region. What exists is the sea. Vast, unpredictable. And perhaps that is more than enough. If there is anything left to push to its limit before the final conclusion, it is this: the Bermuda Triangle is not a mystery of the ocean, it is a mirror of the human mind. The Bermuda Triangle became an almost living entity in the popular imagination. It is not merely an area between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. It is a symbol. A symbol of total disappearance, of invisible forces, of a boundary between the known and the unknown. But when we remove the narrative veil and examine the factual foundation, we find something different. We find one of the busiest maritime and air corridors on the planet. We find unstable tropical weather, prone to hurricanes and rapidly forming storms. We find powerful ocean currents like the Gulf Stream. We find extreme depths that make search operations extraordinarily difficult. We find nature. We do not find a proven anomaly. The persistence of the myth reveals a fundamental human trait. We struggle to accept randomness. Accidents are often the result of multiple combined factors: human error, weather conditions, technical failure. They are complex but not supernatural. Yet when the outcome is dramatic and physical evidence is scarce, randomness feels emotionally insufficient. The void demands meaning. And the Bermuda Triangle provides that meaning. It transforms a series of disconnected events into a coherent narrative. There is also the factor of oceanic silence. The sea does not preserve visible memory. It does not conserve ruins like deserts or forests. It redistributes, engulfs, dissolves. That creates the impression of total erasure. But erasure is not magic. It is environmental dynamics. For much of the 20th century, technological limitations in locating wreckage in deep water amplified this sense of mystery. Without physical evidence, speculation thrives. Even today, recovering objects thousands of meters below the surface remains technically complex and expensive. The ocean continues to be a technical challenge. But it is not a portal. It is also important to recognize the role of media repetition. When certain cases, such as the disappearance of the USS Cyclops or Flight 19, are retold countless times, they become narrative pillars. And pillars support legends. It matters little that official investigations suggested plausible causes. What remains in collective memory is the absence of wreckage and the phrase, "never seen again." That phrase has power. It resonates. But perhaps the deepest layer is this. The Bermuda Triangle reveals our fascination with limits. We live in an age of complete maps, satellites, and global technology. Few regions of Earth remain truly unknown. The deep ocean is one of the last real frontiers. Turning part of it into myth is a way of preserving mystery in an increasingly explained world. It is not the ocean that demands mystery. It is us. The original question, does the Bermuda Triangle really exist? Can be answered with historical and scientific precision. It exists as a geographic area in the Western Atlantic. It does not exist as a proven supernatural zone or statistically anomalous region. Available data indicate that incidents there are consistent with traffic volume and environmental conditions. But something more enduring than statistics also exists. The imagination. And imagination, when fed by decades of books, television programs, and cultural repetition, becomes almost as real as any geographic coordinate. The sea will remain. Ships will continue crossing its waters. Airplanes will continue flying above its blue expanse. Storms will continue to form and dissipate. And the triangle will continue to be mentioned whenever something disappears in the Atlantic. Not because there is proof of invisible forces, but because human beings will always need stories to explain silence. In the end, the question that opened this documentary, does the Bermuda Triangle really exist? Does not require only a geographic answer. It requires a philosophical one. Yes, there is an area of the Atlantic between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. A region crossed by commercial shipping routes, international flights, and powerful ocean currents. An area subject to tropical storms, hurricanes, and rapid weather shifts. A part of the ocean where depths can exceed thousands of meters and where the Gulf Stream can disperse wreckage with remarkable speed. But there is no scientific evidence of a permanent physical anomaly, no mysterious magnetic field, no recurring supernatural phenomenon that makes that region exceptional compared to other major maritime routes around the world. The Bermuda Triangle exists as a cultural concept, as a narrative, as a symbol. And perhaps that is precisely what makes it so enduring. The ocean has always been a stage for disappearances. Long before any triangle had a name, ships were lost in storms. Long before modern aviation, vessels were swallowed by hurricanes. The sea is neither kind nor cruel. It is indifferent. And that indifference is difficult to accept. When something disappears in the deep ocean, there is no clear final scene. No visible conclusion. Only an empty horizon. And emptiness is fertile ground for imagination. Human beings search for patterns. We look for causes proportional to effects. If the effect is dramatic, a ship with hundreds of people vanishing, the cause must feel equally dramatic. But often the cause is simple. Navigation error. An unexpected storm. Structural failure. Technological limitations of the time. These explanations are sufficient. But they are not spectacular. For decades, cases such as the disappearance of the USS Cyclops and Flight 19 were repeated until they became almost mythological. Each retelling reinforced the sense of pattern. Each omission of technical context deepened the aura of mystery. And slowly the triangle stopped being a coordinate and became a character. A silent character. Invisible. Ever present in maritime mystery narratives. But when we return to the data, the picture becomes clear. There is no statistical record of an abnormal rate of accidents in the region compared to other high-traffic areas. Insurance companies do not classify it as exceptional. Maritime and aviation authorities do not recognize unusual risk. Thousands of ships and aircraft cross the region every year without incident beyond the global norm. What exists there is ocean, vast, deep, powerful. And the ocean does not need myth to command respect. Perhaps the true meaning of the Bermuda Triangle lies in our own nature. It reminds us that, despite technology, we remain small before the planet's immensity. It reminds us that not every disappearance will have an immediate answer. It reminds us that the unknown still exists, not as magic but as complexity. And perhaps, deep down, we need that. We need symbolic frontiers. We need stories that send a chill down the spine. We need places where mystery still feels possible. The triangle fulfills that role. But at the end of this journey, the conclusion is clear. The Bermuda Triangle is not a portal. It is not a cursed zone. It is not a proven anomalous physical phenomenon. It is a cultural construction built upon real events, amplified by media repetition, and sustained by humanity's fascination with the unknown. The ocean will remain. Storms will continue to form. Currents will continue to flow. Ships will continue to cross the Atlantic. And we will continue to look toward the horizon, imagining what might exist beyond the line where sky meets sea. Perhaps the real mystery was never the triangle. Perhaps the real mystery is us, our need to transform silence into legend and absence into narrative. The sea remains. Immense. Indifferent. Real. And that is extraordinary enough.